I was 26 years old, sitting in a booth at Nora's Steakhouse with a steak getting cold in front of me when Marla leaned in, smiled, and said, "We only kept you for the tax break." I didn't flinch, I didn't scream, I didn't even touch the fork. Just sat there with my hands in my lap and an envelope in my bag thinking, there it is. Quick note before we go on. Which city or country are you watching from? Share it below, and then let's keep going. 3 tables behind her, a woman in scrubs, a guy in a flannel, and a college kid with wild hair were talking low, just like I asked them to. To Marla, they were strangers. To me, they were blood. But that moment, it started 9 months earlier, down in the basement of Marla and Dennis's house in Dalton Ridge. The same dull town I'd lived in my whole life. Marla didn't ask me to clean. She stuck a note to my door. Basement, Saturday. Clear space for Janelle's boxes. No hello, no please, just orders, like always. So there I was, kneeling in dust, yanking aside a tangled mess of fake wreaths and Dennis's busted fishing poles, when I spotted it. An old cardboard box, taped shut, crammed behind the water heater. Marla scrawled in faded Sharpie. I knew I shouldn't open it. I opened it anyway. Inside was a manila folder with an adoption decree and a birth certificate I'd never seen. Not the one they showed me growing up. This one was older. My name wasn't on it, just Baby Boy Randone. Behind that, a tax document with an adoption tax credit, $6,800 highlighted in yellow. Then a copy of a bank loan, my social security number typed across the top, even though I was still in diapers when that loan was signed. I sat there on that cold concrete floor, box in front of me, jaw tight. Every time Marla cried in church about all we gave up for Alden, every time Dennis avoided questions about baby pictures, I saw it different now. I tucked the birth certificate into my jacket, slid the rest of the papers back exactly where they were, retaped the box, and walked upstairs like nothing happened. Out in my garage apartment, I called Rhea from the vet clinic and told her to meet me behind the building. 10 minutes later, we were in her car, dome light on, her hands shaking while she read Baby Boy Randone out loud. She looked up and said, "That DNA kit I gave you for Christmas, use it. Tonight. Love doesn't come with a tax line." I did the cheek swab, registered the code, and dropped that envelope in the blue mailbox outside the post office, knowing full well there was no going back. The phone call ended with Alice still crying and me still not knowing how to feel. I stayed sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the closed laptop like it might explode. Sunday came around, and I walked across the yard to the main house like always, but something had shifted. Marla poured sweet tea like it was communion wine, and went off about how Janelle was, struggling, and might need to move back for a bit. Dennis didn't say much, just nodded along and passed the mashed potatoes like he wasn't watching me closely. When she started her usual line, "After everything we've sacrificed for you," I tuned her out. I could almost hear the fake piano music from her church speeches playing in the background. This time, it landed like a business invoice, not a guilt trip. At the clinic, Rhea picked up on the change fast. We were trimming a golden retriever's nails when she said under her breath, "So what's her name?" I blinked and she added, "You're real, Mom." "You got the match, didn't you?" I told her in the break room later. Alice Rendon, nurse, married, 1 kid, 3 hours away in Cedar Falls. Rhea leaned back, arms crossed, and nodded slow. "You gonna meet her?" "Eventually," I said, though part of me already knew I would. A couple nights later, she came over with Chinese takeout and her beat-up laptop. We sat on my floor, cartons open, while she made me run a credit check. Sure enough, there it was again. That same loan from the basement papers. Opened when I was a toddler, never paid off, still sitting under my name. She looked up at me and said, "Start taking screenshots. And don't show your hand till you're ready to flip the whole table." I started saving everything. Copies of the loan, the tax credit forms, the DNA results. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew I'd need evidence. That Friday, Alice called me again. Her voice shook a little less this time. She told me about her job at the clinic, her husband Mark's bad knees, and how her son Keaton was studying graphic design and trying to grow a beard that refused to cooperate. I asked her why she never tried to find me. She said she did, for years, and when I didn't show up in any registry, she thought maybe I was better off not knowing. Then she said something I didn't expect. "If you ever want to meet Alden, we're here, no pressure, But this time, no one's taking you from me. I didn't say yes right then. I just said, I'll think about it. Then I grabbed the stack of documents from the counter, walked to my closet, and pulled out an old duffel bag. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I'd started packing anyway. The first thing I noticed about their house wasn't the peeling paint or the sagging porch. It was the wind chime, tinny and soft, like it had stories to tell. When Mark opened the door, he didn't hesitate, just reached out a hand and said, "Good to finally meet you, son." No stutter, no awkward pause, just full eye contact and something solid in his voice that caught me off guard. Alice stepped out of the kitchen, arms full with a casserole dish, and for a second, I thought she was going to drop it. She stared like she wasn't sure I was real, then rushed over, set it down half on the counter, and gripped my hands like she didn't trust herself to let go. Keaton came bouncing around the corner in a college hoodie with a ripped cuff and said, "So, this is the guy," like I was a character from a story they'd been passing around the dinner table. Dinner itself was chaos in the best way. Mark argued with Keaton about music, while Alice kept piling food onto my plate like she hadn't fed me in years. Nobody asked for gratitude. Nobody brought up sacrifice. Every conversation bounced to the next without guilt or pressure, and I didn't realize how tense my shoulders were until I felt them drop halfway through dessert. After we ate, Alice pulled out a tiny jewelry box and opened it slow, like it might break. Inside was the hospital bracelet, yellowed with age, stamped with baby boy Randon. She said a nurse named Carla Boone had slipped it off my wrist when they took me away, and smuggled it out to her like it was treasure. I didn't know what to say, so I just held it in my palm, thumb brushing the cracked plastic, and nodded. When I left that night, Alice pressed a thick envelope into my hand. Inside were pages of notebook paper and hospital stationery, her handwriting tight and slanted. She'd written about being 22, about her parents pushing her into meetings she didn't understand, and a social worker sliding documents in front of her like it was already decided. Back in Dalton Ridge, I told Marla I was covering for a sick tech at the clinic. She didn't question it. I started switching shifts every chance I got. Drove to Cedar Falls whenever I could swing it. First 3 times, then 4. Each time, Mark showed me some new trick. How to patch a pipe with cheap tools. How to check the serpentine belt in a used car. How to hit a nail straight without denting the wood. Stuff I should have learned years ago. One night, after Keaton went to bed, Alice lit a skinny white candle and placed it in the kitchen window. She said she'd done it every April 3rd since the day she gave birth to me, so you'd know you weren't forgotten. I didn't speak. I just watched the flame flicker and tried to hold myself together. The drives back got harder. I'd pull into Marla's driveway and see her herb garden, perfect rows, not a weed in sight, and feel like I was stepping into somebody else's version of my life. That 4th trip back, I parked behind her house, shut the engine off, and just sat there for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, knowing I couldn't keep playing both sides much longer. The next Tuesday after work, I pushed open the door of my garage apartment and saw a single sheet of paper sitting on the little table by the sink. No greeting, no signature, just a typed notice saying my rent was jumping from $450 a month to $910, starting in 6 weeks because of market conditions, and because Janelle supposedly needed the space. I sat down, grabbed an old envelope, and started doing the math, the way you do when you already know the answer will hurt. My vet tech pay barely covered gas, groceries, and the student loan from community college, and that was before anything went wrong. If Marla decided to yank me off their health plan on top of the rent hike, the numbers stopped working completely. I walked to the main house still wearing my scrub top, and found Dennis in the kitchen stirring his coffee like the spoon might solve the problem for him. I asked if he had seen the note. He didn't look up, just said, "Your mother has her reasons," and added that Janelle really needed somewhere to land. I leaned on the counter and asked him straight, "Where exactly do you expect me to go?" The spoon kept clinking against the mug while he stared down into the coffee. After a long pause, he muttered that things were complicated and Marla was under stress. That was the closest he ever came to taking my side. Back in the garage, I opened my laptop and started looking at rentals in Cedar Falls. Tiny studios sat around the mid-600s, and small one-bedroom places ran a little higher, which meant the move would hurt, but it might still be possible if I lined up steady hours at a clinic out there. The next morning in the clinic break room, I called the insurance company and asked what would happen if my parents dropped me from their plan before I turned 27. The woman on the phone spoke like she delivered the same speech every day and told me I would have a short window to sign up for my own coverage that would cost around $380 a month. I wrote the number down on the back of the rent notice and stared at it for a while. That was the moment I decided I was not going to explode at Marla and storm out with nowhere to sleep and no doctor coverage. If I was leaving, I would leave with a plan and every document I could carry. Rhea caught me later, lining up medicine bottles in the supply cabinet like they were soldiers. She watched for a minute and then said, "You are planning something big, so stop pretending you are not." I told her the outline, and she nodded once before saying that walking away with a plan always beats running with a trash bag. On my next drive to Cedar Falls, I stopped at the free legal clinic downtown before heading to Alice's place. The attorney there, Lena Crowley, shook my hand so hard my knuckles popped and told me to start from the beginning. I laid out the adoption, the tax credit papers, the rent hike, and the loan tied to my social security number. Lena listened without interrupting and said the adoption could never be undone because it was finalized when I was a baby. She added the loan looked like identity theft, even if it came from inside my own family. Then she slid request forms across the desk and told me to collect records quietly and move out first. I picked up the pen and signed. The morning of the dinner, I woke up before my alarm, head pounding like I'd been up drinking, even though I hadn't touched a drop. I stared at the ceiling of that garage apartment, knowing I wouldn't be sleeping there much longer. My bag sat packed by the door with the envelope inside. No backup plan, just that. Janelle had left more boxes on the front porch of the main house the night before. 3 of them labeled with hearts and glitter pen. One of them was half full of nail polish. I walked past them without a word. By noon, I was sitting on the break room bench at the clinic, staring at the floor while Rhea double-checked the schedule. She tossed me a granola bar and said, "You ready to make a mess?" "Not trying to make a mess," I said, unwrapping it. Just not letting her talk over me this time. Rhea leaned her elbow on the counter. "Good. Keep your voice low, your hands steady, and your exit lined up. You're not showing up to get closure. You're showing up to close the door for good." At 3, I left work early, cleaned up, put on a clean shirt, and drove into town with both hands tight on the wheel. I wasn't nervous. I was done being nervous. I was ready. Before I went inside, I parked a block away and texted Alice. "We're still on, middle booth, I'll give you the nod." She replied 2 words, "We're here." I walked into Nora's 20 minutes early. The place smelled like butter and burnt pepper. I nodded to Nora at the hostess stand. She knew me from church events, and slid into the booth marked for kin, party of 3. The restaurant was already filling up. Couples in button-downs and floral dresses. Church families with loud kids. I spotted Pastor Luke near the back with his wife. 2 booths down sat Shelley from the insurance office, flipping through a menu. Marla had picked this place for a reason. 5 minutes later, she walked in like she was being photographed. Teal dress, big hair, fake smile. Dennis followed behind, face tight, shirt tucked too perfectly. I stood, shook his hand, and sat again before she could lean in for a hug. We ordered food, barely talking. She asked about the clinic. I gave short answers. Dennis stirred his water with his straw and avoided eye contact. When the waitress left, Marla folded her hands and gave me a soft smile. "Alden, honey, your father, and I wanted to take you somewhere nice for your birthday, and also, there's something important we need to talk to you about." I just nodded and let her keep going. She told me I was adopted, like it was a fresh piece of news. Said they'd taken me in when I was 3 days old because a girl in Cedar Falls didn't want the burden. Said no one else had stepped up, so they had. Then came the money. She talked about the resources that helped them raise me, about how the adoption credit had come in handy, and how now that I was 26, the benefits were gone, and it was time for me to stand on my own 2 feet. Dennis cleared his throat and added, "We've even spoken to a lawyer about how to formally separate responsibilities." He slid a document across the table and set a pen on top. "You don't have to sign tonight, but we'd like you to." I looked down at the notice, 45 days if I signed, 20 if I didn't. Neat little trap wrapped in birthday dinner. Marla sipped her wine and said, "You've had a good run here, but Janelle needs that space, and we've done what we could. It's time." I reached into my bag, pulled out the white envelope, and set it gently beside my plate. The envelope sat on the table between us like it might hiss. Marla's eyes narrowed, her voice tight. "What is that supposed to be?" I looked at her, then at Dennis. "You said you were done. This is me saying I'm done too. but I'm backing it up with facts. I slid the envelope open and laid out the first page, my original birth certificate, the one with Baby Boy Rendon typed right in the center. I saw Marla's lips twitch when she read it, like it physically hurt to see a name she'd never spoken. Next came the DNA report, 99.8% match to Alice Rendon, printed right next to her photo. Then the adoption tax form with the credit amount highlighted. Then the bank loan with my social security number typed across the top. Finally, the photo, me standing in Alice and Mark's backyard, Keaton's arm over my shoulder like we'd grown up together. Marla didn't blink. She just leaned back and crossed her arms. "I found the papers you hid behind the water heater," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I know what the tax break was worth. I know about the loan I never agreed to. I know who my real family is now." Marla let out a sharp breath and said, "Your real family? You mean some nurse and a handyman who dumped you in a hospital and ran? You're lucky we stepped in." "You didn't step in," I shot back. "You stepped on. You used the system, made money off it, and told everyone at church what a saint you were. You don't get to rewrite that just because you printed a clean eviction notice." Dennis shifted in his seat, eyes flicking toward the DNA printout. His mouth opened, then shut again. Marla leaned forward, eyes sharp. "We fed you. We clothed you. We gave you a roof when nobody else wanted you. And you never let me forget it," I said. "Every single favor came with a price tag." She slammed her hand down on the table, rattling the glasses. "You're ungrateful. After everything we did," I cut her off. "I was a kid. I didn't ask to be adopted. You wanted a tax break and a paycheck. And when the money ran out, so did your interest in being parents." The room had gone quiet. 2 tables over, Shelley Rudd was pretending not to listen while holding her water glass in midair. Pastor Luke turned his head slightly toward us, but stayed seated. Then Marla said the line that finally pushed it past the edge. "That girl in Cedar Falls was a wreck. We did you a favor keeping you from that kind of life." I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just raised my hand, palm up. "You don't get to talk about my mother. Not tonight, not ever again." She laughed like it was funny, like I was being dramatic. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I reached back into the envelope, pulled out the hospital bracelet Alice had given me, and set it down beside the photo. "You don't even know what you took from her." Marla's eyes went to the bracelet, then darted back up. "That's not yours." I looked her dead in the face. "It always was." And then I turned toward the back corner of the restaurant and gave Alice the nod. Alice stepped up first and placed a steady hand on my shoulder, like she'd been waiting her whole life to do it. Mark stood behind her, quiet but present. Keaton stuffed his phone into his hoodie pocket and nodded at me like we were teammates walking onto the field. "Marla, Dennis," I said, looking straight across the table. "This is Alice. This is my mother. This is Mark. This is my brother Keaton." Marla pushed back from the booth so fast her knee slammed into the table, rattling the dishes and sloshing her wine onto the eviction paper. She pointed a shaking finger at Alice like she was seeing a ghost. "She doesn't get to call herself your mother. She didn't raise you. I did all the work. I'm the one who gave up everything." Alice didn't flinch. Her voice didn't even rise. "I'm not here to fight with you," she said. "I'm here because my son asked me to stand with him." Then she looked Marlo in the eye and said, word for word, "We only kept you for the tax benefits." Half the room went still. Forks paused midair. Glasses hovered over napkins. I heard someone at the bar let out a low whistle under their breath. Dennis made a sound like he was trying to swallow something sharp. "That's not how it was supposed to come out," he muttered. "Things were just hard back then." He wouldn't look at me. He kept glancing toward Pastor Luke like he wanted someone to step in and fix it. Marla caught the cue and turned toward him with her most innocent voice. "Pastor, please, you know me. Tell them I've been a good mother. Tell them I gave him a real home." Pastor Luke looked down at his plate, then slowly raised his eyes to meet hers. He paused like he wanted to find the perfect words, then said softly, "This is between you and your son. I'm not standing in the middle of it." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded. Marla blinked like she couldn't believe he hadn't jumped to her defense. Her mouth opened again, then closed. She grabbed her purse off the bench and stood. The eviction notice and the pen still sat in the puddle of wine in front of me. She didn't touch them. "You'll regret this," she hissed under her breath, loud enough for only our table to hear. "You think this little display means anything?" I looked at her, then down at the bracelet still on the table, then back at Alice's hand on my shoulder. "Yeah," I said. "It means everything." Marla spun on her heel and marched toward the door. Her heels clacked so hard across the wood floor, it sounded like firecrackers. She didn't stop to speak to Nora, didn't wave at anyone. Just pushed through and vanished into the parking lot, like she was late for something more important than her son's life. Dennis stood slower. His eyes met mine for half a second, then dropped to the bracelet. He looked at Alice, then at Mark, and finally at Keaton, who just raised his eyebrows like, "Yeah, man, we're not scared of you." Dennis didn't say a word. He just gave me one small nod, barely a tilt of the chin, and turned to follow her out. I watched the door swing shut behind him, then turned back to the table and picked up the photo of me with the Randones. I slid it back into the envelope, took a breath, and pushed my plate to the side. "Anyone still hungry?" I asked. When the front door at Nora's finally shut behind Dennis, the noise of the room eased back in slow. Forks scraping plates, soft conversations picking back up, the kitchen bell dinging from somewhere behind us. But at our table, nobody moved for a few seconds. Alice's hand stayed firm on my shoulder like she was anchoring me. I exhaled hard through my nose, and for the first time that night, I felt it, the come down. That sharp edge in my chest went dull. Keaton broke the silence by grabbing a menu and saying, "So, do they still have that steak special, or what?" And that was it. I cracked up. Full body, head thrown back, kind of laugh that left me gasping. Nora came over, wiping her hands on her apron, and set down extra plates like we were royalty. She leaned in close and said, "Your bill's taken care of, sweetheart. And that eviction paper?" She pointed at the wine-soaked sheet still sitting there. "I'll make sure it finds the trash." Then she slipped it into her apron like it was dirty tissue. We ordered food again, not because we needed it, but because we'd earned it. Over dinner, I pulled the folded hospital pages from the envelope and asked Alice if I could read a part of the letter she'd written all those years ago. She gave a small nod. I read the paragraph about Nurse Carla Boone, how she'd held Alice's hand while she sobbed and whispered that crying didn't make her weak, it made her a mother. I had to stop once, my voice caught, but I got through it. I noticed the people at the next table pretending not to listen, but I also saw one woman quietly blotting her eyes with a napkin. Shelley from the insurance office stopped by on her way out, gave me a squeeze on the shoulder, and said she was sorry, she hadn't known the full story. I believed her. Before we left, Nora asked if we'd pose for a photo for the wall. She lined us up by the wood paneling, me in the middle, Alice and Mark on either side, Keaton behind us making some dumb face like he was 15 again. Nora snapped the picture and said, "That one's going up in the family section." That night, I drove back to the garage apartment for the last time. The place looked smaller now, like the walls had closed in on themselves since I left that morning. It felt more like a storage locker than a home. I didn't sleep. At sunrise, I started packing. I shoved books, clothes, and dishes into any box or tote I could find. 2 trash bags for laundry, 1 box for vet gear, 1 for the folder of documents I wasn't letting out of my sight. Around 8, Rhea pulled into the gravel in an old pickup, still in her pajama pants, and with coffee in each hand. She didn't say "I told you so." She didn't ask if I was okay. She just said, "Let's get this done," and started hauling boxes like we were moving into a treehouse. Before we pulled away, I went through the main house one last time. It smelled like lemon cleaner and stale coffee. I didn't see Marla or Dennis, but sitting on the counter by the coffee maker was an envelope with my name in Dennis's shaky block letters. Inside was a short stack of small bills, 20s and 10s, and a photocopy of my current insurance card. He'd circled the phone number and written in the margins how to call and transfer it into my name. It wasn't enough to change anything, but it was something. I set my house key next to the eviction paper and took a Sharpie to the bottom of it, wrote, "You don't need 45 days. I'm gone today." Then signed it and left it right there in the open. As we drove out of Dalton Ridge, I kept my eyes forward on the road. I didn't look in the mirror until the town faded behind us. And when the GPS finally said, "Welcome to Cedar Falls," I had to pull over, sit on the side of the road, and let it all out. Moving into Alice and Mark's guest room felt less like crashing and more like landing. I brought in 2 boxes, a duffel bag, and my dog hair-covered work boots. I insisted on paying rent. Mark didn't argue, just waited until Alice walked out of the kitchen and slipped the money into a jar above the fridge like it was going toward groceries. 3 days later, I clocked in for my first shift at Cedar Falls Animal Center. Dr. Mina ran the place like she had no patience for drama. The coffee was brutal, the fluorescent lights flickered, and the front desk printer made a high-pitched whine that could drive a man insane. But the place worked. People respected each other. When things went wrong, no one blamed the tech. I'd never realized how much that mattered. The work was the same: nervous owners, sick pets, pee on the floor. But I came home feeling like I'd survived something worth doing. Not a test, not a debt, just a job. And when I pulled into the driveway at night, there was no tightness in my chest, no half waiting for someone to leave a note on the door. Evenings settled into a rhythm I didn't know I'd been craving. Mark showed me how to rotate tires with a socket wrench that kept slipping. Alice pulled me into the kitchen and taught me her lasagna recipe one layer at a time, smacking my hand when I tried to skip ahead. Keaton and I argued about superhero movies while sharing a bag of off-brand chips, his legs draped over the armrest like he owned the couch. One afternoon, I went back to Lena at the legal clinic. She handed me a sealed envelope, my adoption file, and waited while I opened it. I read the parts about Alice's parents signing papers, pushing the process forward before she really understood what was happening. It wasn't surprising. It still stung. We went over the loan again. Lena had me freeze my credit, file a fraud report, and send a tight little letter to the bank with documentation. "You don't have to drag Marlo into court," she told me, "but you don't have to roll over either. You've got a right to protect your name." Weekends, Keaton dragged me and their mutt Diesel to the park. He said Diesel and I were the same, rescues that didn't know how to take a compliment without flinching. I laughed, but he wasn't wrong. Rhea called every few days with updates from Dalton Ridge. She said Pastor Luke had preached a sermon about kids not being property and parents not confusing control with love. She said a few people had shifted pews, stopped clapping quite so loud when Marla walked in. Shelley sent screenshots of a Facebook post where Marla called me an ungrateful child and claimed she'd been betrayed. The comments didn't go how she wanted. People asked if it was true she'd tried to evict me on my birthday. The post disappeared before the sun went down. Janelle messaged me, long and awkward. She said the garage felt haunted, like she'd moved into a life that didn't belong to her. She'd gotten a roommate across town. I told her I didn't blame her, and I meant it. One night, Dennis called. His name lit up my screen, and I stepped onto the Rondon's back porch to answer. His voice cracked more than I expected. He said they'd been broke when they took me in, said the tax money had helped them stay afloat. He tried to explain, but I stopped him. "I'm not here for the why," I told him. "I just need to make sure it doesn't happen again." After that, he started sending short Tuesday texts. "Hope you're well." I'd text back, "I'm good." It wasn't healing, it wasn't closure, but it was mine, and Marla wasn't in it. A year to the day since Nora's, I turned 27 in a second-floor walk-up in Cedar Falls, with a window that looked out over a stretch of trees and a rent check with only my name on it. No backup signature, no shared mailbox, no note from Marla on the counter. That night, we did it big. Mark was out back grilling chicken, swearing the coals were too wet, while Alice moved between the stove and the sink with a sauce-covered spoon in her hand. Keaton hung a crooked happy birthday banner in the dining room and yelled at the tape when it wouldn't stick. Rhea showed up after her shift in Dalton Ridge, still in her scrubs, holding a cheap bottle of red and a card that said, "I'd help you move a body. No questions asked," which, from her, was the most loving thing you could get. They brought out a cake from the grocery store bakery, slanted in the middle with "Happy Birthday," Big Bro scrawled in uneven blue icing, no paperwork on the table, no files, no surprise announcements, just plates, candles, and the kind of chaos that only happens when nobody's pretending. After dinner, Alice handed me a small box. Inside, on a simple leather strap, was that hospital bracelet she'd saved all those years. I slid it onto my wrist without a word. It rested right above the old watch Dennis gave me when I turned 18. One from blood, one from years. Both mine now. A week later, I stopped by Nora's for lunch and she pulled me aside. Said Marla had come in alone, sat at the table by the window, and stared at the photo of me and the Rondons on the wall for almost 10 minutes without touching a menu. Then she got up and walked out without saying a word. I didn't feel smug hearing that. I didn't feel anything close to triumphant, just quiet, like whatever story she'd been spinning all those years finally ran out of tape, and I wasn't the one stuck rewinding it anymore. That night, I lit a white candle on my kitchen windowsill, just like the one Alice lit every April 3rd. Not for the birthdays we lost, for the one we'd finally had. For the year we actually lived under the same roof. For the arguments, the dumb jokes, the seconds that built something real. My phone buzzed. Dennis, like clockwork. Hope you're well. I stared at it, then typed, I'm good. Hope you're finding your way. Then I set it down and let it be. With Diesel snoring under the table and the bracelet cool on my wrist, I opened the voice recorder on my phone and hit record. And I started telling this story exactly how it happened. Hey, before you scroll, what would you do if your family treated you like leverage? Tap, hype. Please subscribe and like and drop a quick comment, even just good story.